Hello and welcome to my podcast. I'm your host, Larry Liu, and today I'm joined by Luis Rondan Vasquez, and he's currently based at the University of Florida at Gainesville. So, Luis, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Larry. Yes, I am a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Florida, and currently I am doing my dissertation about precarious work in Peru and the US, and I am happy to talk more about that and also maybe your research interests as well.
For sure, for sure. Yep. So let's start with the precarious work. I mean, because just as a little background introduction, I mean, we both met at the Labor Employment Relations Association conference in Seattle. It was 2 weeks ago,
Hmm.
and there, of course, were a lot of sessions that dealt with labor and employment relations. So many of the audience that are listening in will not be very familiar with issues in labor relations. So
Mhm.
maybe start with defining the term precarious work. How do you understand that term?
Of course. So precarious work might be defined in a broad sense. Then one of the most common definitions that is used in literature is the definition coined by Caleber, Nick Caleber, no? She's an American sociologist. He used to define precarious work as uncertain and insecure type of job. No? This is, as I said, a broad definition, but we can define it more concretely in and looking at the work of other authors, no? For instance, operationalizations of the concepts that they are always useful to, make it more specific. For instance, Ferreira, no? Which is she's an author that addressed precarious work in Colombia. She used to define precarious work with a association with a set of aspects. No? For instance, low social benefits, lack of a permanent labor contract, could be lack of access to health insurance, lack of access to pensions, lack of have access to protection for unfair treatment at work, and low levels of unionization, among other aspects. No? But in general, it's basically having an insecure type of job.
Right. And help the listeners to understand, like, how pervasive that phenomenon is. So, I mean, you mentioned, of course, the United States, and then the Latin American context, including Peru and many other countries. Um, yeah, tell us about broadly how widespread precarious work is.
Well, I think I have data. I remember that one of the most recent information I remember about this is that I think in 2016 or 17, no, according to ILO, 6 out of 10 workers are associated with precarious work worldwide. So this most more than the half. So yes, and that is a very huge concern because of the implications of precarious work for the living conditions of people.
Right. And so this was a global survey. I mean, is there any kind of national variation that we should pay attention to?
I think so because like as I said, the fact that I mentioned it, no, was basically an statistics provided by in the International Labor Organization, but we can see variations by countries, by regions. Now, for instance, there are regions where precarious work could be more prevalent because it's associated with informality, the lack of labor contracts at all, not just lack of permanent contracts, no, but lack of contracts at all. No? Because, for instance, in the US and other developed countries, precarious work used to be associated with a lack of permanent contracts or full-time contracts. No? But in other countries, it could be the lack of contracts at all, and the the prevalence of forms of precarious work associated with the lack of labor contracts could be um, very extensive in some countries. For instance, in Peru, I think in the year, let's say 2023, no, in the rate of informal work was around 75%. So it is a lot of people. No? And I think it is something that could be similar in other Latin American countries. So yes, you can see variations. I think in the US, I don't remember the year, but the rate of informal work is way lower. No, it could be 25, 20. No, it's a way lower. So we are talking about completely different labor markets.
Let's see. Now, another issue is about the causes of precarious work. I mean, certainly, I mean, the main example I had in mind, are the academics, because this is the example that we know best from
Mhm.
personal experience, right? I mean, we're distinguishing between, full-time tenure track faculty versus the adjunct faculty. And oftentimes, from the administrative standpoint, they think that, you know, uh, hiring more of the adjunct faculty would lower the payroll costs, and would allow them to deliver education at a lower rate. Um, but aside from these kind of examples, I mean, like, what do you think is kind of one of the causes of driving the precarious work?
Well, that is a very interesting question because we can, if you want a broader theoretical framework, no, one of the frameworks that is very useful in my view to see this is world systems theory. No? This the theoretical framework associated with the work of Immanuel Wallerstein that basically talks about the global expansion of capitalism. No? And how the global expansion of capitalism, no, was based on the basically the accumulation, no, of surplus value, no, that relies on the systematic reduction of costs, including labor costs. No? So with globalization, no, basically the level of competence between firms increased, no, and these motivates, no, capitalists to seek different strategies to um, decrease, no, production costs, including labor costs. No? For instance, in the 70s, no, it happens in the US, in other developed countries, we can see many changes in the economy. No? For instance, the automation of production, no? On also the downsizing of the companies. No? So these two changes, no, helped capitalists, no, to decrease their demand of labor power. And in parallel, they expanded the supply of labor force, no, because they basically, no, go to other countries, for instance, no, relocate their operations and also include formerly marginalized workers, no? Like for instance, women and also immigrants. No? So you can see this dynamic of expansion of the labor force, no? The workers, no? And also the reduction of the demand, no, in labor power. No? So obviously this situation, no, create advantages for capitalists, no, because it helped them, no, to basically be more likely to offer lower labor conditions, no, including lower wages, no, many aspects associated with the flexibilization of labor, right? And because of the increasing competence between workers to get a job, no, because of this situation of, no, less jobs and more work or more workers, no, they are more willing to accept this situation, to accept these poorer labor conditions. And this was no one way in which we can explain what happened, no, in a broad sense. No, of course, this process might vary by countries. It depends also of the welfare systems, no, because the process of neoliberalization, no, of the economy might differ, no, based on the institutional framework of different societies. Um, so, well, also, no, the situation, no, of decreasing demand in labor power, no, um, um, erode the negotiation capacity of the unions, no, because of basically, no, the workers are less required, no, they require workers in less numbers. So it basically the the role of the worker became more, no, or less relevant, no, because and the need decreases, no, and and also it decreases the number of people in unions. In that the unions became weaker, no, lower in numbers, and this obviously, no, has an impact in the negotiation capacity of the unions, which could make it possible that capitalists could, no, bargain better arrangements for them. And also, no, you can think that maybe, no, if they are relocating their plants, no, because one of the moves of capital, no, to lower labor costs is basically move to, no, markets with cheap labor. No? So if you can think that this will create jobs, no, for people in developing countries, because it is, no, it happened. But the jobs creator, most of the times, no, had poorer labor conditions than the former jobs, no, that were no, available, no, previously in developed countries. So, no, all of these aspects contributed to the deterioration of labor conditions. No, but it's a process that, no, could have nuances based on different aspects of the societies.
Right. So, with regard to the globalization of labor, I mean, the employers, the capitalists make the argument that they are on that creating new opportunities. If you take a country like Bangladesh that exports a lot of garments and textiles, um, through basically globalized textile firms. Um, the argument is simply that, well, the opportunity cost for a Bangladeshi garment worker is going to be a poor farmer, right? Um, and to earn much lower levels of income compared to the textile industry. Um, yeah. So, what would be sort of your counterpoint to that capitalist employer argument?
Well, indeed, they are creating new jobs. The question is if these jobs have good the same levels of quality than the previous jobs. So basically, they are moving their operations to other countries because it's cheap. No? It's cheaper. No? So basically, no, the jobs that they are producing will not have the same quality. No? And you can say, okay, they are creating jobs for the local workers, which is good, no? And the opportunity cost, yes, you can see that, no, and maybe they can have better labor conditions compared to other, no, types of jobs. But the issue is that, for instance, when globalization happened, no, and basically they opened their markets, no, the capital was able to move to different locations, no? Um, One problem with that, no, is that, for instance, capitalists, no, can invest and can create jobs, but also, no, and the opening of the markets, no, this is something that some authors said, no? um, might restrict the development of local companies because they need to compete with transnational companies, and they cannot create good jobs. And so they basically, because no, and that given that the economy and the markets are open, no, local companies need to compete, no, with transnational companies that could be more developed, no, and could be more difficult to compete with them. So they are not able to create even good alternatives, no, for giving good labor conditions. So the issue is that, no, this dynamic also, no, to some extent restrict the growth of local companies in some cases, no? In some economies. It depends because, for instance, you can see examples of development and also development of local companies in some countries, for instance, in the Asian tigers. It happened. Yes, they developed their companies, but how they did that? No, that is a good question. No? In some cases, it was a combination. No? Like they can open some sectors of the economy, but protect others selectively, no? Based on performance standards and temporarily. No? So this happened, for instance, with South Korea, for instance.
Right. And so there are cases within, development where I guess some countries do much better than others. I guess you mentioned the example of Asian tiger. Now, I guess the issue would be like, yeah. So how are, let's say, labor relations structured differently in the different regions? That is to say, what type of labor relations structure promotes the economic development that you would see in, let's say, the Asian tigers, but let's say, less of that kind of development in, let's say, Latin America or Sub-Saharan Africa, for instance.
Well, I think that is a very interesting question because in Latin America, if you see the history of some countries, no, they tried to do what is called an industrialization by the replacement of importations. No? So they are trying to some extent, for instance, to create local industries, no? And they try to protect their industries, no, with, for instance, tariffs and other means. But the issue was that the way of doing it was not the same, that in, for instance, in the Asian tigers. As I said, for instance, the tariffs in some countries like South Korea, no, were very specific. No, they open some sectors, protect other sectors. The tariffs were based on performance, no, were temporal, no, and they are monitored, no, by the government. No? So that is something very specific. They are not just say, okay, I will protect your industry, and I don't care if you are not competitive, no, in the long term. No, no? So they needed to show results. So because the idea, no, was that in some point, no, they should be competitive. No? It should not be just a protected market, no, that creates revenues because of that, because of these advantages. No?
All right. And on the, yeah, I guess let's talk a little bit about the maybe the consequences of the precarious work. I guess, like, what are the implications for the people undergoing this kind of work? I assume, for instance, that, let's say, lower earnings, right, would have an impact on the quality of the education that the workers' children could experience, right? Or the inability to afford, let's say, surprising medical bills if they have some sickness within the family or themselves. Um, yeah, I mean, so what do we know about the kinds of the consequences of that precarious work?
That is precisely one of the topics that makes this situation so relevant because it creates a broad range of negative consequences. It also has positive outcomes, so that is interesting. So it's not just I I. I am trying to be very careful to think that something is completely negative or positive. No? We need to see also no, that if there is something positive no, that is associated because it is complex. For instance, regarding the negative outcomes, there are many. For instance, precarious work is associated with the decrease for instance, in the fertility rate, marriage, delaying. Also, it creates issues in life planning. No? It creates issues in housing, no? To be able to purchase your own home, to pay the rent. No? It creates issues in social equality, increases the inequality gaps. It creates also issues in social participation because precarious workers are more likely to um, um, avoid to participate no, in collective actions. They don't have time, they don't have energy or resources. No? They are more concerned about no, surviving. So that aspects no, are associated no, with precarious work. Also regarding health, no? Precarious work is associated with the increase of the consumption of alcohol. It is also associated with suicide thoughts, is associated also with hair problems. No, it's a wide range of problems that they are associated with precarious work. Regarding the positive outcomes, well, we need to think, no, how to define, no, positive. No, you need always to contextualize. It is associated with resilience. No, I published a piece in an encyclopedia about environment and society about resilience and precarious work. So basically, the precarity, no? So that situation no, of insecure living conditions or insecure type of job will lead to develop no, some skills, no, like resilience, no, so being able to adapt no, to difficult situations and try to no, extract positive outcomes from these functions. No? So developing, for instance, good skills, no, based on limitations, no, try to boost no, some abilities, no, in order to compensate no, a lack of resources of some of force or lack of some type of resources. No? For instance, I remember a study that said no, that um, in workers no, that had a background, family background, no, or maybe their own background no, associated with no, um, poor working conditions of the relatives or themselves, no? They dealing better, no, with, for instance, on certain types of jobs. No, this is not their satisfaction and their levels of, for instance, mood and risk of depression are lower than compared with other types of workers that didn't have that kind of background because in some the explanation that the authors gave is that no, given that they were used with this situation, they developed ways to navigate the situation. Maybe no rely on the support of the extended family, the friends, no ways to see the life in different ways. No, maybe ways to find sources of motivational support, maybe religion, I don't know, no? But they develop these no, ways to cope with this situation. This will be positive, yes, but to some extent, no, is something that they need in order to continue no, in this type of system, no, and it could continue to perpetuate these poor labor conditions. So we cannot say that, okay, precarious work is positive because it's creating more resilient people. No, it could be tricky to think in that way. Okay, it is creating resilience and it could be positive, but still, no, I think it is not something that justifies that kind of labor conditions.
Well, I mean, if you think about the opposite extreme, right? So let's say if I was born into a very rich family, right? And which means that I don't really have to work a proper job, and I would receive financial support from my parents for my daily living expenses, including an extravagant lifestyle compared to the average person. Um, in that case, I guess your argument would be that the rich kid does not have resilience, right? Because there's some level of difficulty or yeah, obstacles that you have to be able to overcome in order to develop this resilience. And therefore, I don't know. I mean, we're sociologists, not evolutionary biologists. But I wonder whether you kind of would also be interested in this point of saying that our ancestors have evolved, uh, going back to the hunter-gatherer days,
Mm,
to deal with the complications of daily survival, which I guess means like literally hunting and gathering for food.
mhm,
Um, and this has made us kind of, how should I say, I guess biologically fit, right?
mhm.
To basically reproduce, carry your genes forward. Um, yeah, so I don't know. Do you think that this argument about resilience, has a deeper biological meaning?
Mm, well, I don't know to what extent you can think in a biological transference of these skills. I think it's more like, well, I am inclined to think in social influence because I am a sociologist. No? Think like maybe you can think in that kind of resilience, but in a long term, no? Like biologically transferred by genes or something like that, no? But maybe in that time frame of intergenerational change between generations in the society. I think thinking in that term could be I think it is unlikely, no? Because like I think for a biological changes we need to wait more time in order to see these changes, no, in biological terms. But I think that there is I think this is something that is controversial, no? Because when you see the requirements nowadays of the types of job, saying we need resilient people, you need to tolerate work under pressure, you need to no, you need to basically be able to resist long work journeys, and you need to do many things, no? That basically you can think that they are saying no, you need to be ready to work as hard as possible, no? But the question is if this hard work will be compensated equally, no? If it is not just I request to do as to work as hard as possible, no? And given that I have advantage in the market, no, I will give you the less as possible. That is the issue, no? And if you are developing skills to cope with that, good for you because you will survive. But the question is if this is the kind of life that we want, that we deserve.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And so then let's talk a little bit about the policy approaches to precarious work. I know that the British economist Guy Standing had written about
Mm,
precarious work extensively, and he's also an advocate for universal basic income because it is separated so it separates the receipt of income from the direct, labor effort, which is kind of, how a lot of the social insurance system are based upon, right? Which is the reciprocity principle, right? So I pay in and then I get something back.
Mhm.
And with basic income, we are explicitly and openly violating this reciprocity principle. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like, so what is your take on, well, generally, what can be done to reduce precarity and then your comments on basic income?
Well, I think it is like a complex issue, no? Because, well, for one aspect, no, I think the solution is to create good jobs. No? Um, one of the, well, I think this is one of the key aspects. No? Other elements could help to decrease the likelihood of precarious work. For instance, education might help, no? But it always depends on the demand. No? If there is no demand for educated workers, they might need to take any kind of job, no? And if the most of the jobs are precarious jobs, they don't have any other choice. No? So I think it is you can think in elements that might decrease the likelihood of having precarious work, like improving education. No? Also, you can develop policies that might help to decrease the mismatch between the labor supply and demand, because in some cases there are no gaps, no, in the demand of specific profiles that could be no could be satisfied no with proper training, and this will help no to, for instance, improve the labor conditions of people. No? For instance, in Peru we have an affordable type of higher education, which is the technical education, but also this education no, is associated with jobs that are on demand, and that demand is increasing over time. And it's increasing more than, for instance, types of higher education associated more with the typical no, undergraduate major. They are more technical oriented education. So, for instance, this type of education no, is affordable. No? It requires less time no, than the traditional undergraduate studies, no? And the demand is relatively higher. So I think it is a good avenue. No? For instance, if you are young and you want to go to get a well, maybe a better job, no, than if you will not study, no, and you need to choose what to study, no, and you don't have too much resources. Then one good option could be technical education. No? Oh, and also it could be a platform to get a job and have more resources in order to continue your education. So I think it is one way, but certainly, as I said, it depends on the creation of good jobs, no? And also creating standards, no? Because one common justification of capitalism, I think it partly could be considered, no, partly it makes sense that they say that we are not like we need to compete and make our companies more competitive, right? So if my competitor, no, and other companies are doing no, things, no, that basically decrease their labor costs, no? They are paying less to their workers, no? And I need to compete with them. No? So I am to some extent constrained by this dynamic of competition to do something similar. No? Maybe you can go and be creative, no, and see a way to, keep the good jobs and decrease the labor costs. would be the ideal solution. No? But in many cases, they ended doing the same, no? Reducing labor costs, reducing labor benefits, wages, etc. No? So, in order to avoid this situation, I think we need no specific standards no? that will be not just a dynamic of competence, but a competence under a specific legal framework no? That makes that establishes some thresholds no? Regarding the quality of job.
Right. Yeah. The other issue that I was thinking about is the impact of automation, because you mentioned that in order to be competitive with other employers, I would have to cut my labor costs, which I guess Marx would consider the um, is it relative surplus value, I think, and then there's the absolute surplus value, which I think comes from innovation, technology, productivity increases, right? And if I remember the argument in Das Kapital correctly, that in the long term, actually the technology element, is actually more important than just like the relative surplus value, right? Which is because there's physical limits as to like how much work hours that you can impose on the workers. There are labor laws that restrict how much how hard you can work them, overtime pay, and all these things. Especially in developed countries. So I guess this idea of labor market competitiveness seems to be built on using technology, isn't it?
Well, yes, but the issue is that I think in the work of Marx, no, the idea is the labor that is socially necessary. No? And basically, Marx tend to view technology as something that sooner or later, no, most of the companies will have in the same level. No? Because if a company uh, introduces an innovation, then this innovation no, will not be necessarily the sole property of that company. No? Maybe with patents or something, no? But it tends to be socialized no? Very, very quickly. No? Like, for instance, AI. No? We saw that. No? We are living in that moment. No? You saw someone is created the first AI like ChatGPT, and then other AIs, no, other software like ChatGPT appear, no, to compete, no. So the issue is that innovation, no, is something that should not necessarily be something that is predictable, no. You cannot say, okay, I will innovate, no, in 3 months I will do 2, 3 innovations. It's not so predictable, no, and it's something that it could be easily socialized. No? That is why Marx used to think that technology will create, of course, it could create no, a decrease in production costs that no, it will go in favor of the increase in profits. But the issue is that it's not necessarily something that could be systematic, no, because innovations cannot be something that is so too predictable, and it could be easily no, adopted by others, no, sooner or later. Other reason why I think the main axis no, of the capital accumulation was labor is because I think Marx said no, that workers no, are those who create value. When you use a means of production, you are transferring the value of the means of production to the commodity, but you are not creating new value. Now, those who can create value no, are the human beings. So I think in the view of Marx is like that. No? So there are two reasons why no, the the workers are one of the main, no, elements in creating, no, the surplus value. And I think that there are margins to find solutions that could be, um, fair for both sides. Because I think that, no, one issue regarding this kind of, no, a problem is that you might think that, no, is like being on the side of the capitalists or the workers, and they are not middle ground. No, they are not a way in which they can win. Both can win. No? But maybe there are some ways. No? For instance, there are some ideas about, for instance, decreasing the number of labor days, no, in a week, no, to boost productivity. No? But workers will have more time, but with the same wages. No, so they will not be like, you will work less, but you will receive a lower payment. No, so you will keep your wages and you will work less. No, but the idea, no, is that in that way you can save costs. No, for instance, costs of electricity or rent of, no, or maybe, no, cleaning services or other expenses associated, no, with functioning an extra day. But the idea is that it helps to consolidate, no, a way of working that could be more productive, more tied to specific outcomes, no, basically discard what is useless, no, and in that way boost productivity. No? And it worked. I think I remember cases in UK. No, I remember a news about that, no? About an experiment that was conducted, and it shows that it might be possible. The question is if it could be sustainable in the long run, no? Because people might say, okay, I can be productive, no, in that kind of regime, no, as long as the experiment will go, no. But I don't know if they will continue doing their job in the same way in the long run, no? Because then the issue is, no, that it should be permanent. No? One way could be, no, the idea of productivity, no, because there are an issue with productivity in many countries, no, for instance in the UK. So that could be an incentive for capitalists, no, in order to think in improving labor conditions. So I think there are ways in which capitalists and workers can win. No? The question is always who will win more, no? Who will get more? No? So always that is the question.
Yeah, I mean, on this point of like, shared prosperity
Mm,
financed through increasing productivity, I am a little bit skeptical of that thesis,
mhm,
largely because, I mean, of course, we all have seen the divergence between um, the productivity and the wages. Like in the United States, I mean, I don't know about other countries where they publish similar figures, but it seems to me that and of course throughout that duration, I mean, you see a decline in the unionization rate, especially in the private sector. And so it kind of stands to reason that the rises in the productivity, in the absence of labor friendly regulations and labor unions, would actually result in the increase in inequality simply. So basically, so you have more economic output that's generated, but because organized labor is so weak, that additional income will flow to the rich, right? Mainly by inflating assets, right? Like company assets, like stock market values, and real estate, right? So you have like real estate bubbles, rising prices of housing, etc. Yeah, so I guess the, yeah. So what would be a response to that? I mean that productivity does not lead to shared prosperity.
Not. I think it is not, something that will mechanically create shared prosperity, but I think it is an incentive, no, that capitalists will have in order to improve labor conditions. And always you can do it, no, in a tricky way. For instance, maybe say, okay, no, well, we can work 4 days, no? But you will ask to do more tasks per day, no? At the end, you will end more tired, and ultimately, your extra day will be just sleeping. No? There are always ways in which you can, no, take advantage. So I think it is not just magical solutions. Even if it worked in some reality, doesn't mean that it will work in the same way in the other reality. No, we need to see the details. No, it's always important. No, as no, in this phrase, no, the devil is in the details. No, we need to be careful how to do that. No, but I think there are other motivations, right, in which, for instance, there are other motivations that might be compelling for capitalists to share prosperity. For instance, I remember, no, that world systems theory said, no, that there are, no, cycles of expansions and contraction of capital. One condition, no, for capital expansion is also create markets. So you cannot create market if you cannot share, to some extent, no, at least, no, partially the income that you are producing, no? And the profits that you are producing. You need to some extent partially, no, redistribute this to create market. No?
So it's a
Uh,
consumption-based argument. So you need to create consumer purchasing power on a demand side.
exactly. You need to do at least partially, as I said. No? And also, no, it is also important in order to make the economy more stable. No? Not only because people will feel more satisfied and therefore will tend to accept, no, more likely, no, will be more likely to accept the system as it is. No? Uh, but also, no, in cases, no, in which the consumer demand, no, is very important for economic activity, like in the US. No? um, you need, no, that money flows, no? And the money need to be invested in the economy, no? In order that the economic activity will continue. No? What happened, no, when you can see people that concentrates the money, no, for different reasons, no, they maybe don't want to spend, or they don't need to spend. No? They don't need to spend. No? They only need to eat 3, 4 times a day. They don't need to eat more. No, and even if they have a lot of money, they don't need to spend more. No? Instead, no, for instance, families in the middle class or working class, they spend most of their income, no, in needs. So it means that the money flow, no, and they are, no, economic activity. No? If this flow is paused, no, it could create fluctuations in the economy that will, no, basically make economy unstable. No? It could make more likely an economic crisis. No? And in an economic crisis, the rich and the poor will be, no, harmed. Obviously, the rich could be in better shape to resist, but still, it's not convenient for them. No? So inequality could create negative aspects also for the people that is at the top.
That's right. Yeah. So I know there was this argument by the two British researchers, Wilkinson and Pickett. I think it was more than a decade ago. The spirit level, and the argument was that yeah, that inequality, if it's too extreme, also lowers the happiness among the rich people, among the uh, you know the more affluent population. Um, and yeah, I did not read the whole argument, but I guess the intuitive idea. I mean, I was thinking of like a recent example of Jeff Bezos traveling to Venice in Italy, and he is it's a very lavish wedding, right? It's like $50 million, right? And then there was this one little headline where it says that he was also giving $3 million to I think local community organization in Venice, uh, and it was meant as a bribe, effectively, right? So he did not want the local community to protest against all of these rich people coming in, and it was kind of, it's a bribe to quiet down, more or less. And right, so I mean, and then if you imagine, like, if you're like a rich person, I mean, like, are you able to insulate yourself from the I don't know, the tensions that exist within underlying society, right? Like, you might want to build bunkers. Maybe you can protect yourself in that way. Um, but yeah, so I don't know. Like, what's your take on the spirit level argument that we all have to care about inequality, not just the poor people?
I think it makes sense because, well, if we think in the economy as a system that needs feedback, no? We need to see the need that no people need to participate in this system because this system was designed in that way. Um, Money flows not because people want, it's because people need to pay things. No, they have needs, and that's why that people make expenses. No? Most of the time, they need to purchase things. So and also, I think it is very unlikely that rich people, especially if they continue no, doing economic activities, can be completely isolated from society. No? um, because they are running companies. No? They are no inside. No, they are working with others. No, in some way. Unless you can think, for instance, someone, okay, I am rich, I am cutting the ties, no, I am closing my companies, and I just live with my wealth. No? Yes, you can do that, but no, maybe people, no, no. Well, I think you cannot at least you be completely out of the society will be no aside of the things that might happen in society. For instance, if poverty and no it rises, no, and then people needs to survive, no, then crime rate rises, no, and this could create negative consequences for wealthy people, no, if they are living in society, even if they are a side of society, and an economic crisis happens and maybe the banking system collapse, money they have could be, be compromised. Mm. So it will be difficult to think in people aside from what happens in society. I think it is possible, but I think it is unlikely, no? And would be difficult to think.
That's right. Yeah. So in a sense, I mean, I guess the idea is that we're all in this together, right? I mean, we're all connected in some way or another. I mean, in broader economic structures, and this requires us to be, therefore, we have to think about designing a system that is, I guess, more sustainable, right? More stable, more equal, I guess. Um, and yeah, and I guess the labor market approach in your mind is an important one, right? So that is to say, you'd have to reduce the amount and the severity of the precarious work.
Mhm.
But then the Marxist argument very strictly is that the capitalist system would require some amount of precarious work as a way to I mean, essentially to hold the wages low enough that you can facilitate capital accumulation, um, right? So in that sense, I mean, I guess the suggestion is that there's an irreconcilability, right, between the you know kind of like a more equal social arrangement or more stable arrangement of society versus you could say the needs of the capitalist system, right?
Mhm. Well, I think it is interesting to thinking, for instance, precarious work from the perspective of Marx, because I actually wrote a paper about that, no? And I think it is, and the relationship should be assessed carefully, because in the time of Marx, we can see, no, aspects of precarious work. It is very clear, no? For instance, low wages, no? And also temporal contracts, no? Not necessarily, no? People that used to work, no? In permanent positions, no? Especially, no? With a high, very large reserve industrial army, no? And of course, no? Capitalists seek to lower labor conditions, including wages, to maximize profits. But when we are talking about precarious work is an interesting concept because it is coined, no, to basically account for the deterioration of labor conditions in the decade of 70s, 80s, no, particularly in Europe. And their deteriorations regarding to what? What was the reference? No? And the reference is the standard labor employment, access to healthcare, unions, no? Full-time contracts, so all of this standard, no? This standard employment model, no? Was shaped after World War II, no? In many developed countries. So in the time of Marx, we can see aspects of precarious work, but we cannot see a definition of precarious work, no? Because precarious work was defined in contrast to something. No? And the reference to define precarious work is precisely the standard employment model that was shaped in a socio-historical context that was after Marx. And it was created after the two world wars, trying to boost the economy, trying to boost social contract, and that legitimize the system at that moment. So um, precarious work has this historical background. No? So as we can say, okay, so yes, in precarious work is not new. No, we can see aspects of precarity in previous times, like in the time of Marx. No, but the way of defining precarious work is, I think, it is more contemporary because it's defined in a socio-historical context that implies a standard employment model that was eroded in the previous decades, since the 70s, with all the processes associated with neoliberalism. So it is a concept and a term that is associated with an historical background and is associated also with a discussion regarding how to interpret this. No? Is a precarious work was a term that was coined in a critical view of the changes in labor conditions, because you can see other concepts that account for the same situation. For instance, flexibilization of labor. But labor flexibilization was a concept that was coined, no, by mainstream economics, management, no, and basically was viewed in a positive way, no, as a way to, make uh, companies, no, more competitive, no, and help them to, maximize their profits, no. But they are not, addressing this same aspect in a critical way. The concept of precarious work do that. No? So this is another view about the same situation, another assessment. No? And precisely this idea of flexibilization, no? Was present, no, in the mainstream institutions, no, associated with economic dynamic, no, companies, no, managerial, no, approaches, no, but from social sciences, no, and also, no, those studying labor conditions and poverty, no, they tend to view the situation in other way. No? So it is a concept that was shaped socio-historically in a specific context and with a critical view about what is happening. No? So that is very interesting, no? Because it allows us to see a more like a greater dimension about what is called precarious work nowadays.
Right, and in this long sweep of history, I mean,
Mm.
uh, like, does the nature of precarious work really change? Because I mean, I guess, like in the naive view, I mean, for somebody like myself who has not studied this issue at length, I would think that it kind of remains the same. I mean, even if, like, let's say certain labor tasks are different, right? Like, for instance, I don't know, an Uber driver who is, precariously employed would be maybe have a higher absolute standard of living than, the textile factory workers that were described in Manchester in the 19th century by Engels and Marx and others. Um, but nonetheless, I mean, but this concept of like the employer, treating the worker as like a kind of like a contractor, as a day laborer, with uncertain um, shifts sometimes, right? Or arbitrarily determining the pay levels. Um, it seems like there's some historical continuity in that concept, isn't it?
That is a good question. I think that um, it was a process, and we need to see is as it is, no? Because we can say that, no, for instance, in Marx's time we have these, no, poor labor conditions, no? Then they change it to some extent, no? The socio-historical forces contributed to shape a standard employment model in some societies, no, that acquires some prestige, no, and also relevance, no, even if there is not like a model that was adopted, no, and spread in other countries, it is taken as a reference. For instance, the International Labor Organization, no, has many aspects associated with the standard employment model in its definition and operationalization of decent work, for instance. So it has influence, no, in the academic and the world of the public policy, no? An international organization. So it is something that no, uh, uh, although it was not, no, a model that was present worldwide, it acquires weight and relevance. And I think, no, we can say that precarious work happened, no, at least some aspects of precarity were present in Marx's time, but I think the extent of them, no, and the existence of others, no, um, could be could change, no, in some point. No? For instance, as I said, in when the we saw the development of the standard employment model. In some societies, for instance, in the US, no, it was more common to see workers, no, that are working full time, no, with a relatively permanent contract with labor benefits, no, having union protection and other aspects. So the situation, no, could be, no, considered better than other types of labor conditions. Like for instance, people working in the gig economy, no, without unionization, no, and that their ability to negotiate better labor conditions is very limited, no, because it is to some extent, no, hired, no, in isolation from others, no, it's difficult to, create groups, no, and try to negotiate collectively, but you can see examples, but still, no. So I think that we can say, no, that labor conditions in the so-called golden age of capitalism, that is defined by some scholars like Lasha Nuri, and from 40s to 70s, for instance, in the US. We can see that in that period, no, we can see a redistribution of the income. There were more people like joining the middle class. No, the education levels were rising. No, so I think that the feeling and the interpretation of the labor conditions was considered that it was better, no, because of this sense of security that many workers used to have in that moment, no, in some societies. I am not talking in general, no, worldwide, no, so it could be risky. But this standard employment model, no, has been eroded. No? And that's why we are talking about a precarization, no? Because precarization means deterioration, no? Deterioration of something that previously, no, was in better shape, no? Like the standard employment model. And one of the aspects that is important about this is that the standard employment model implies a more equal redistribution of risks, no, the risks associated to work. No? For instance, no, if I am hiring someone as a permanent worker, no, with a permanent contract, no, this worker will work, no, hard for me, no, in theory, no, and in compensation, no, I will pay, no, his or her wage, no, despite if, no, I have some issues in, no, production, if my profits will decline, no, so I am also sharing, no, the risk, no, in the economic activity, no, but no, nowadays, no, if you don't have demand, then you will fire people, or you will hire people only by specific moments for specific activities, no, for specific outcomes. No, in that way, you are not sharing the risk. No? You are basically placing the worker in the risk of, I don't know if tomorrow I will have a job, no, but the employer is always, no, able to get workers. No? For instance, in the gig economy could be an example of that. No? That they will have a very, no, broad, no, pool of people able to do the job, but no, but the people have less control about their capacity of having, no, economic opportunities through these apps than the owner of the platform in hiring workers, right?
Yeah. And yeah. So let's go back to this issue of automation again, because you briefly mentioned AI is kind of the contemporary major phenomenon. yeah, right now, I mean, you see a lot of talk, especially within the technology sector,
Mm.
that that many jobs are threatened by artificial intelligence. Now, of course, many of these AI companies, I mean, they have to do some level of marketing because they have to show that their product is better than the competitor AI company. Um, but I did see some indications, like in the labor market of computer coding, for instance, right?
Mhm.
Where like in the Reddit feeds, I mean, I think there's more people that are talking about it in a very panicked way. That there is a lack of, um, you could say, job security. There've been some downsizing that's been happening the last maybe year or two. Um, and in some cases, the coders themselves are saying that they were training the algorithm to replace them ultimately. They, is there some kind of story that we can tell about whether this time is different, or that's not something? I mean, or it's kind of a recurrent phenomenon, and then 50 years from now, I mean, we'll have the same kind of discussions while we have full employment.
Well, I think this is a very difficult question to answer, no? Because we are living that moment, no? And we are not seeing exactly what will happen because we are in the middle of the change. What I am seeing now, no, is that the development of AI certainly will replace some types of jobs. So that is a fact, no? It happened. For instance, I remember I knew about an Indian company that became famous to fire 90% of its staff and replace it with AI. 90% of this because it was a call center. Um, and obviously it created no a strong negative reaction in social media, no? And this company became famous, no, because of this situation. Well, obviously that was not a good, no, publicity, so they tried to. I didn't follow the what happened at the end, no, but it was something very interesting to see, no, that it is happening and it could, threatens, no, many people, no, even, no, you can see companies that could have a drastic downsizing, no, like this kind of company, no. um, but I don't know to what extent it might, have like the destruction of jobs, but the destruction of jobs will be higher than the creation of new jobs. That is always the question, no? To what extent these changes will create new jobs? Because, okay, let's say, for instance, no, maybe, okay, we no longer need maybe, I don't know, maybe academic assistants to answer emails or something like that. Okay. Okay, maybe we need people that will supervise, no, these kind of AIs, no? It happens, no? For instance, in customer service, it happens, no? You talk with the machine until the machine cannot do, no, cannot solve the issue, and then you will talk with someone, no? Maybe it could create, for instance, more profits, no, to companies. They will invest in expand their services or create new services, and this will create new jobs. It could be, no? And then, no, you will have more positions of supervisors of AI. Okay, how many? No, relative to the people that was fired. No, so that is the issue. No, if the amount of jobs will be enough to cover the supply of laborers, no, in the market. Um, and this is one aspect. The other aspect is regarding qualifications. because probably the types of job that will remain will be types of jobs that will be associated with maybe could be a higher level of education or maybe manual jobs, no, that are, temporal and maybe simple, but it is still, no, cheaper, no, to hire human beings instead of complex robots with, no, good motion capacities to do that. No, it might be, no, that is still cheaper to hire, no, someone to, clean your pool instead of, no, purchasing a machine, no, that could be complex and sophisticated. Um, but the issue is that if you want to get a good job, you will need to have, no, specific skills associated with levels of education, no, commonly tertiary levels of education. And the issue will be if, no, most of the people is able to get these skills, no, in the moment they will need them. Because I think this change is going fast, very fast, no? And I think the changes regarding the previous technological changes, because we experienced these kind of changes in the past. Of course, no? In the Industrial Revolution, it happened. No? But I think the issue was that one is that, for instance, nowadays the some of the jobs that are, no, um, um, that might be eliminated could be jobs that require some levels of education. So I think having maybe high school or even the graduate degree might not necessarily be, a life insurance regarding this situation. No, maybe you will need more training. No, you will need higher levels of education or specific skills. No? Um, the other thing is that, as I said, it is going fast, and I don't know if like mm, people is or policymakers are aware about the implications about this thing. No, I think we are not many people, including scholars, are not sure completely about the implications. So it is very concerning because if you don't know the implications, then you cannot plan ahead and you cannot, try to propose policies that address these potential negative effects in the pace, no, that you need. So I think that is something, no, that might be problematic.
Right. And I guess it raises the ethical issues. So, I mean, if we make the stipulation that technology is getting better and it can take many of the jobs, not just the blue collar jobs, but increasingly the white collar jobs,
Mhm.
because the white collar jobs, like the ones that you and I are working, they require, um, I suppose you can summarize it as brain power, right, rather than muscle power. Um, if we assume the argument, I think Daniel Zuskind, he's an economist at Oxford, he calls it um, AI task encroachment. So, which is the idea that the abilities of AI keep on expanding. So, let's say if you have an average occupation which has, I don't know, 750 unique tasks, right? And it it then gradually expands the tasks that it can cover. Now, for the human worker, in order to be fired, I mean, yes, it is true, like all 750 tasks have to be automated, right? It would have to go down from 750 down to zero, right? Which the human would do. I mean, and that was always one of the arguments that the automation critics were using, right? To say that, well, as long as, you are needed to do, let's say, 200 of those tasks, you'll be able to focus your full-time effort to complete the remaining tasks, right? Or to take on the new tasks that previously did not exist, right? Like overseeing the AI, which, of course, used to not exist because there was no AI.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, okay, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, if we make the assumption that the task encroachment has become successful, um, then you might have the elimination of certain industries, certain jobs. Then I think, uh, then the next question I think that arises is, what is the meaning that people should develop in their lives? And is it necessary that it is tied to the work identity? And I'm asking that because, so let's take, say, the hunter gatherers, or the peasants, which was, I would say, 95+% of human history, right? Like
Mhm.
just those two, I don't know. I mean, we can't really call them occupational groups, right? Because they're not really about the labor contract, right? So
Mhm.
they're not about like selling the labor power in order to get money back to buy something on the market. These are basically just activities to produce the food, feed themselves,
Mhm.
make it another day. Um, and so, within this long human evolution, this idea of the labor contract, I, I would argue, is something very recent, right?
Mhm.
I guess as an experience for most people. I mean, I suppose, like, if you used to be, a soldier, in the, like, middle-aged army in Europe, then yes, you were a laborer. Um, but for the vast majority of the peasants and the hunters, you were not. Um, so if we accept the argument that the work contract is has a very recent time duration, right, is therefore, I don't know, evolutionarily insignificant. Well, then the question arises: should we hold on to work, in the sense of, the labor contract, as the core human identity? Do we need it?
Well, we need to to think what is the meaning of work. Huh? It's always interesting to talk about that, because like many times we think in work and we are thinking in paid work, no? Having a job basically. No? But we can see that, for instance, work could be defined as any activity that produces value that could be, given to someone else. No? That's why, for instance, domestic work, unpaid domestic work, no, could be defined as work. No? Despite it is not, no, associated with a payment. So we need to first define what is considered work. No? If we can think in work as an activity that produces value, no, for someone else, no? Because, for instance, if you are cooking your dinner, you are not working, no, in a strict sense. You are producing value, but you are the main consumer of that value. So it is not, no, it's not necessarily, considered in the common way work. No? Work is always a value that could be, work is always associated with an activity that produces value that could be, no, given to a third person, no? Serving others, no? Or maybe, well, serving others in a broad sense, no, in domestically or maybe in a company, no. So if we think in doing work, no, in those terms, no, I think it is still valuable, and you can think in doing work, no, in different ways. No, for instance, doing engaging in collective activities that are meaningful for you. And this is something that could give you a sense of purpose. No, I used to talk in my lectures about the concept of ikigai. I don't know if you are familiar with that concept.
I've heard about it, but you can refresh my memory here.
Course. Ikigai basically is associated with a meaning of a resilient happiness that is associated with having a purpose in life. No? So, given that you have a purpose in life, no, you are able to tolerate no, the problems, the negative outcomes, no, because you have a reason to live, something that matters for you. And so that thing that matters, no, could be something that could be unpaid. No, for instance, this ikigai is a Japanese word, no, that is associated with this idea of resilient happiness, associated to have a purpose in life. No, this is a very important idea for the Japanese culture because, for instance, it could be associated with longevity, healthy lifestyle, and also happiness. For instance, these type of ideas were common among all senior citizens, Japanese senior citizens in, I think, one of the village in Okinawa that is considered one of the village with associated with longevity. No? And they are very well known for the longevity. Basically, in this village, those are villages in which you can see mostly senior citizens living together, no? And they are retired. Most of them are retired. They are not working anymore, but they have a task that they need to do that matters for them, and is associated with a collective service. No? For instance, maybe I don't know, no, do gardening, no, or keeping the public spaces in good conditions, no, take care of the children or something like that, no, collective task that matters for them, no? And it means that no, they have an activity, no, in the community. No? They are valued because of that. They feel that they need to do something. No, this thing is important for them. No? And it makes them active. They are active, they are engaged with the dynamic of society, and they tend to spend time together with other senior citizens, no, doing collective activities. And all of these elements, no, being active, doing something, no, that makes them feel they have a purpose that is socially valuable, no, and also having no an active social life, all of these elements, no, plus a very quiet lifestyle, no, makes them very they makes them likely to be to live longer, no, so and live in a healthy and happy way. So I think we can get most of the work. I think work is here. And I think if we can think in the work in the sense of Marx, no, this idea of the homo faber, no, than this idea of being the human being as a being that is able to produce, no, and produce in a very specific way, no, in an universal, conscious, and what is this? Universal, conscious, and I think freely way. No? So I think there is plenty room of that for that. No? Even if we don't have paid jobs, no? I think our capacity to create, no, to produce for different purposes, even for no our own self sense of fulfilling, will be still there. No? I think it is tied to the human identity. But aside of that, the paid work, no, could be in crisis, no, because it was formerly one of the axes of identity. Uh, but nowadays, with all these changes, it's becoming more and more, no, deteriorated as a key access for an identity, no? Because, for instance, this idea of being a professional, building a career, could be more difficult, no? If you are facing precarious jobs, no? If you need to engage in precarious work, no? Because the sense of continuity is difficult to achieve. If you aim to build a career and define your identity based on what you are doing, it could be problematic because you might change what you are doing. No? Maybe you might not be able to develop the ability, the skills, no, that makes you good in something, no, makes you even famous in something. So it will be not necessarily no something that allows you to be an important part of your identity, something that you need to define in a practical way in order to continue living. No? And that will be problematic, no? Because I think people wants to have a sense, no, of what they do, and maybe in many of us are still working under the idea of building a career, and something that many wish to do, no? And nowadays it's becoming more complicated.
Right. And so I guess for you, I mean, so you distinguish between the paid work and the unpaid work, which of course includes the ikigai kind of looking for the sense of purpose and creating some use value, even if there's no exchange value, right? I guess that's the assumption, right? And yeah, and I think I guess like this is the biggest question of all, which is like, how do we get to a world in which the only type of work is homo faber, right? I do whatever I want, and I do whatever fulfills me, and I do whatever I think makes the best contribution to society. I do not expect any payment in return, which suggests that, well, I mean, either that everything that we need, think of food, housing, healthcare, etc., is free of charge, right? And or there's some universal basic income, right?
Mhm.
So I don't know. I mean, like, is there something about the practicalities of a you could say transition to a desirable world of work? Like, what do we have to take into account here?
Well, I think it is a very interesting question, and of course it will be, and I think it is difficult to give a very satisfactory answer. No? But well, first of all, the idea of ikigai, I think, includes also the paid work. It could include the paid and unpaid work. So that's because Ikigai is basically an idea that is associated with an activity that matters to you, and your paid work might matter to you. No? It could be something a source of self-realization also. No, if for instance, if your work is tied to a collective purpose, no, is fulfilling, could be a part of your ikigai. No, so that is something that could be associated with paid work too. Is for instance, we can say it's close to the idea of vocation. No? But the idea of vocation not necessarily is associated with a collective purpose. No, it's just my more based on what you like. No, more than if this is serving to a higher purpose, no, a collective purpose. No? Regarding your question, well, I think that what you are talking is about this idea of that is close to the idea of Marx about, for instance, um, this idea of development of the human beings, to build a society of maximum freedom, in which people is able to do things for self realization. No? In this situation, the work will not be a means to live, but a reason to live. No? So that is a very important change. So regarding to do that, I think that the main issue will be how can we sustain a society that might function in this way if people used to do only what they want in the moment they want, no, in the amount and the no the pace they want. How can we sustain a modern society in the way it is? No? Because, for instance, in the idea of Marx, no, one of these requirements for having this maximum freedom is basically abolish any type of concentration of power, no? Because the concentration of power, no, in the view of Marx, could be a main source of oppression, no? It could be the concentration of power in the government. It could be the concentration of power in the market, no, in the companies, no. But the idea is to abolish any type of concentration of power. But the question is if our society, no, in the way it is, a modern society with this institutional framework, no, with this complex organization, is able to survive without a concentration of power. No? This allows us to talk um, about the ideas of Weber about the government. So Weber said, a modern society in the way it is, no, with its complexity, it might be unlikely to continue without a bureaucratic system. And a bureaucratic system implies a concentration of power. Is a power concentrated and in hierarchically organized. No? And one of the main aspects that this government, no, is concentrated is the monopoly of the legitimate use of violence. No? So we might ask, no, to what extent, no, we can have this same society. But when one way to avoid that, no, imagine a conversation between Marx and Weber, no, maybe Weber might say, but Marx, we cannot do that. No, it's no, we cannot sustain a modern society in that way. And Marx will say, but I am not talking about a modern society. No, it could be that, no, maybe we don't need a modern society so complex, so bureaucratic, no, so developed, no. Well, that is a good question, no. Maybe in the way it is, the society might not be able to give us this amount of freedom, no? But maybe we need to think in other way of living.
Right. And that's kind of what we want to achieve, right? I mean, it's like, can we create a more ideal outcome? So I'm very mindful of the time, so I'm gonna call it to an end. So thank you very much, Louis, for your time, and of course we can talk about any of these issues with much deeper intent next time, for sure. Thank you for coming on, Louis.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.